Good morning. I don't know if I said in the introduction that I expect all of you to get A's in this course. And we come pretty close to that at the end because we review and we review and review. So if you do your part, I'll do my part. My heart's in the right place, and I'm sure yours is too. All right, with that introduction, let's go back and pick up cells. All right, because the cells are the basic anatomical unit of the body. Basic anatomical unit of body. It's very hard when you're teaching a first grader what a cell is, and even giving this description. But obviously for you it's easy. Cells come in many sizes, different shapes, and we're only going to, in this course, discuss a few of these. Let's take sizes first. Let's take the smallest. The largest. And the longest. And interesting enough, all three of these sizes are in the nervous system. So where do we find the smallest? These will be just names to you, but as we study the structures, they'll be repeated again. So right now we're going to find the smallest will be 4 micra. What's a micron? A micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. 1,000th of a millimeter. Equals 1 micron. So it gives you an order of magnitude of the dimensions of the cells we're talking about. The smallest form will be the granule cell in the cerebellum. The granule cell, we'll show a picture of it. You saw it last time. Granule cell in your cerebellum. The largest will be the anterior horn cell in your spinal cord. It's 135 micra on average. And this will be the anterior horn cell in the spinal cord. Just to give an order of magnitude to compare it with, what's the size of the human ovum? You ovulate each month. What's the size? 120 micra. 120 micra equals the human ovum. Obviously, I'm putting it in there only to let you know that at that magnification you can see the dimensions with the naked eye. See with naked eye. All right, now the longest cell. The longest cell is the pseudo-unipolar cell in the nervous system. Pseudo, what does pseudo mean? Pseudo-unipolar cell. Pseudo means false. Unipolar means one pole. So what kind of cell is this? It has a false pole. Well, this cell is going to have a process coming into the cell. Here's the cell body. And then the process going out. So let's say that the end of this cell is in your big toe. Think of your big toe. Can you see it down there? Don't look at it. You know it's there, don't you? All right? So this is going to be coming from the toe, and the information is going to come up into this cell, and it's going to come in this pole. This is my cell body. And this cell is going to be in the lower vertebral region, is all we'll call it now. Lower vertebral region. So we've come all the way up this one process from our toe all the way up to here. And now the impulse has to go back out again and go up to the lower brain stem. So where does the pseudo come in? Well, if you just saw the pole, you'd say, well, it's only got one pole. But functionally, it has in and out. Therefore, it's called a false unipolar. And how long is it? Since we said it's the longest, well, let's just take an average height of an individual, say 5 feet of 9 inches tall. Average. So you're going to consider coming up the leg roughly 3 feet, another 2 feet here. So you have a cell from a single cell body that's roughly 5'9". I think it's amazing, right? Longest cell, a pseudo-unipolar cell. But that gives you an idea that sizes can vary. Now, shapes vary too. Extremely. The greatest number of shapes, again, will be in the nervous system, so we're not going to even start with those. You've had just a couple of them here, but not in detail. You'll get them later to varying degrees. But let's just look at shapes. Let's take a squamous cell. Squamous. Squamous, literally translated, it is a scale. You've seen a fish scale. So it will be flat. And an example will be in a capillary. So an example in a capillary. Capillary is your smallest blood vessel. Start to abbreviate. Blood vessel is going to be just BV from now on. Smallest, so it'll have this flat cell, but it's surrounding a vessel, so sort of like this. And that will be your cross-section of a capillary. So that substances can go in and out to the tissues easily from the blood vessel. We don't want much of a wall in our cell. When we need a cell to be conveying fluid, we can have a cuboidal cell. Cuboidal cell, the height will equal the width, just as it says, cuboidal. Where are we going to see cuboidal cells? Certainly we don't want them down here at the finest point of our vascular system. So we'll have them lining ducts. Line ducts that are conveying fluids. As you're sitting there now, you're pouring saliva out into your mouth. So the ducts from salivary gland is an example. Ever thought about your salivary ducts before? And then we will need a different type of cell for our digestive system. We're pouring all those hamburgers, milkshakes, all that rough stuff into our system. We don't want a simple cell. We need more than a cuboidal cell. So we'll have a columnar cell. So the length will be greater than the width. Columns. And our example will be the digestive tract. digestive tract. Example, digestive tract. So there are all kinds of these in different, these are just simple cuboidal, simple columnar. You can have stratified columnar, stratified cuboid. You can have stratified squamous. Your skin is all stratified squamous when you have many layers of these. These are just basic, simple layers. Can have stratified. Many layers. By the time we finish, we'll be able to name any tissue, and you'll tell me what kind of epithelium it has in it. You do, I know it, because we keep repeating it, repeating it. You can just say, well, it does this function, therefore it should have that kind of cell, right? So, with this introduction to our cells, let's now go back to our skeleton and our divisions of our skeleton, which we said we had the axial and the appendicular skeletons. We're going to take the axial skeleton today, but we'll give our definition between the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So the axial skeleton just means that it will run through the medial axis of the body. So if we put a head and the main axis of the body, we can see that the skull will be part of the axial skeleton. So we'll study the skull today and all the bones that make up the skull. But in addition to skull bones, within the skull are what are called your ear ossicles, your ear bones, the smallest bones in your body. So they're put in with the axial skeleton, the ear ossicles. For you to be hearing me now, your ear ossicles are moving. As we move down from the skull, the next bone, we'll talk about it in a moment, we're just going to name them now, in the neck will be the hyoid bone. How many have heard of your hyoid bone? As we go down, we'll have the sternum and the ribs, because they're attached, and the sternum and the ribs constitute what's called the thorax. Thorax. Or a thoracic cavity. So we see, here's our sternum, here are our ribs, the cavity beneath is the thoracic cavity. And then we've got to take the structure, but it's on the posterior surface that runs in the medial axis of the body, the vertebral column. So we'll just call this, well, the vertebral column's got to come in here, so we'll put it here. So this gives us the bones of the axial skeleton. Now the appendicular skeleton are these appendages which hang out here. So we've done this one, and we have these out here. So we have the upper extremities for the appendicular skeleton. Upper extremities. And their girdles. You've perhaps never heard that term applied to the body before. So with the upper extremity, what will the girdle be? It will be that part of the skeleton which attaches the upper extremity to the axial skeleton. So the clavicle and the scapula make up what's called the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle equals the clavicle and the scapula. The lower extremity also has a girdle. The girdle for the lower extremity is called the pelvic girdle. We talked about pelvis last time when we talked about bone marrow. So the pelvic girdle consists of 3 bones. We'll talk about it later, but now we're just listing them. Pelvic girdle equals the ilium. We had the iliac crest. The ilium. The ischium. Right now you're sitting on your ischium. So you get tired of sitting, tailbone sore. You're not sitting on your tailbone. There's your tailbone. You're sitting on your ischium. So let's be correct anatomists. Ischium and the pubic bone. Pubic bone. So these 3 bones constitute ilium, ischium, and the pubic bone is around here in front. We'll talk about these when we discuss this later. But you have the general idea of an axial skeleton, appendicular skeleton attached by girdles. Very simple concept. So now we want to go back and see the details of these phenomenal structures. So let's begin with the skull. Skull has 2 major components. It has commonly called just a skull cap. Technically, a calvarium. Calvarium. And the calvarium has some 8 bones. And then we have the facial bones, where we have about 14 to 15 bones. We'll see how many we add up as we go along. So let's begin with the calvarium and start with the frontal. Maybe it's easier to name them and then describe each one of them. We have the frontal, we have the parietal, the temporal, what's the next one? Occipital, the sphenoid, and the ethmoid. So let's see what we can learn about these bones and how they form your calvarium. Start with frontal. Well, easy enough. We said previously forehead. So it forms the forehead. And then we'd have to go inside the skull, so you just have to take my word for it. It will form the anterior fossa of the base of the skull. Anterior fossa of base of skull. The frontal bone, if I were to drill right here, I'd find a sinus, a cavity, the frontal sinus. Sometimes you see that on television. They're telling you what to use to clear out your sinuses, and they show you a frontal sinus. So this gives you some of the parts of the frontal bone. The parietal bone, parietal means wall, so it's going to be on the side. There are two of them. The frontal has fused, so you only have one as an adult. Two parietal, wall. And I want to introduce the term suture to you now, because a suture is the joint between the skull bones. And it's important that you understand them. Suture, the joint, let's put it S, between calvarium bones. So if we have, we're looking down at the top of the head, and this is anterior, this is posterior. We're going to have here, I can make this a little bit bigger. So here I have my frontal bone, have my parietal, and have my occipital with our foramen magnum. And I've put in the sutures. This one will be the coronal suture, coronal, between the frontal and the parietal. This one will be the lambdoidal, lambdoidal. Suture. Why lambdoidal? Because it looked to the early anatomists like one of the Greek letters, lambda. So it looked like a lambdoidal. And the one in the midline is called the mid-sagittal. Sagittal suture. And all these are very clear and nice in your skulls. Have they all fused in your skulls? How did they look when you were a baby? When your brain was growing so fast? You had two frontals. You had parietals. I'm just going to put them in crudely. So this would be frontal, this would be frontal, parietal, parietal. And we have connective tissue growing between them. Connective tissue. It's a thin layer. What do they call it in the young baby? Tell you not to poke your finger in the top of a young baby's head. What do they call it? Soft spot. That's the common term. Equals a soft spot. Technically, it's a fontanelle. Fontanelle. That's an anterior fontanelle. I'm only giving one of them. Why do we have to have these? Because the brain is growing very fast after birth. So you don't want tight sutures. You want the give. So this allows for the give. And then as you become older, then the sutures become firm. But fontanelles are very important in the infant. This is infant skull. So that gives you an idea about the frontal. The word about a parietal, it doesn't have many characteristics other than just forming the wall. Let's next take the temporal bone. The temporal bone has 4 parts. The first part is called the squamous portion of the temporal bone. Squamous. Excuse me. What does squamous mean? I just taught you. Flat. So it can mean flat whether it's a cell, or it can mean flat whether it's part of a bone. So this is very thin, flat part. So it's right here, temporal, the squamous portion of the temporal bone. And if you are taking lab, take a skull and hold it up to the light, and you can see that it's quite, I don't know if you can see it, I can see it. It doesn't help, I guess. But just here, it's so thin that it's essentially translucent. So if you're going to get hit in the head at any time, don't get hit in the side of the head. Get a concussion immediately when you crack that part of your temporal bone. Get the back where it's heavy and thick, right? If you have time to think about it. All right. So squamous. Well, I did once, I'll tell you, just surfing in Hawaii, learning how to stand up and surf, and there's so many people surfing, and all of a sudden this head came up in front of me when I was coming down. And fortunately, he turned his head over, because I would have clipped him right in the squamous portion of the temporal bone. So you never know when it's going to be important. All right. The squamous portion, we have the, let's take the mastoid portion next. Mastoid portion of the temporal. Does anybody know what the term mastoid means? Greek, it means breast. What in the world is the breast doing? It just shows these male anatomists saw a little bump in the back of the head. And they called it the mastoid portion of the temporal bone. So it means breast. Isn't that fun to learn names? But where do you hear that term with human females? Mastectomy, right? Removal of the breast, with CA of the breast, mastectomy. So it's good to know your terms. Where in the world did mastectomy come from? It actually related to breast. This is removal of female breast for cancer. All right? But your mastoid process has a sinus in there. So your mastoid has a sinus, and it's an important part of your body because it connects to your middle ear. Connection. And when we study the middle ear, we'll see that it has a connection with your nasopharynx, which we'll get later. Connection with nasopharynx. Why you study anatomy? You get these connections. So if you get an infection in your pharynx, it can go into your nasopharynx, it can go into your middle ear, it can go into the mastoid sinus. And we used to get skulls where the only way they could clear out an infected mastoid process was surgically. Just go in and cut it all out. So we'd get skulls with no mastoid process here. What do they give today to clear out infection? I wait for answers. What do they give for infections? Antibiotics. How about penicillin? They give penicillin. So you don't have to go in and clean this out anymore. You don't see skulls that way. But we used to see them. All right? So it's important to know how an infection gets back here into a temporal bone when you've got an infection up in your nasal cavity, for example. All right, what other part do we have of the temporal bone? We have the zygomatic process. Zygomatic process. It's a lot of word to just mean bar. Let's see, we're 1, 2. Zygomatic process. So we'll say that this is the posterior portion of your cheekbone. Palpate your, feel your cheekbone, and your posterior portion here is coming off your temporal bone, coming up. Here you had your squamous portion, and your mastoid portion. You have the zygomatic process forming the posterior part of cheekbone. Now, we have one more part of our temporal bone. Our fourth part will be the Petrus portion of the temporal bone. Petrus portion. And again, I won't see this from the outside. We'll see it in a moment when we draw the inside. So Petrus refers to hard. Most of the skull's hard. I don't know why they gave this name. But it houses your inner ear. Your Petrus portion of your temporal bone houses the inner ear. And we'll see that again when we talk about ears. So that gives you your temporal bone. Your next one is your occipital bone. We've already talked about one of the major characteristics of the occipital bone. What was that? I don't hear you. What did we say about the occipital bone? Foramen magnum, exactly. You had the big foramen, most characteristic thing, right? Your occiput in the back. Look at how thick it is in comparison to the squamous portion of your temporal bone. So it has the foramen magnum. And that's for the spinal cord to attach to brain. But the occipital bone also has the ability to articulate articular processes to articulate with the first cervical vertebra. So the occipital bone articulates with first cervical means neck, cervical vertebra. What do we call the first cervical vertebra? What holds up the world? Atlas. The first cervical is the atlas. which holds up the skull. Sort of fun to be creative when you're naming bones, right? So with this, we've covered the major bones that you can see clearly. But we have the sphenoid and the ethmoid. And I lost my eraser. Here it is. And these, as I mentioned before, you're going to have to use your books to see, because for the most part, they're inside. Let's look, to start with, at the floor of the skull. And this will be anterior, this will be posterior. So we said that the anterior cranial fossa was going to be our frontal bone. So we'll have frontal bone in here. See if we have enough colors to do this. Maybe and maybe not. So let's make the frontal bone here. So frontal bone will be pink. Then we'll put in what shows of the ethmoid in the base of the skull. This is all base of skull. And then we have the sphenoid. Blue is our sphenoid. And now we can put in the Petrus portion of the temporal bone in here. White, Petrus portion of temporal bone. And that leaves our occipital back here with its lambdoid shape. Occipital. So with this drawing, then, we can come back to our sphenoid. And it's called the keystone of the floor. Because it keeps the other bones in place. Have you ever built an arch? Do you know what the keystone of an arch is? Sure. You've got an arch like this, and you've got the bricks like this. You take out this brick, and everything else falls down. That's a keystone. This is the sphenoid is the keystone of the floor. Now the sphenoid will have sinuses. Sphenoid sinus. And it will form the lateral wall of the orbit, lateral wall of orbit. That's your eye socket. Well, it's on the floor. It's going to send out parts to be in the lateral wall. And now it will form what's called the Turkish saddle. Turkish saddle. How many ride horseback? How many horns on an English saddle? None. How many on a Western saddle? 1. How many on a Turkish saddle? 4. So we're going to see 4 processes. These early anatomists had colorful imaginations. They see these little processes here called clinoid processes. Clinoid processes. And they surround one of the most important structures in your body. When you study this in detail, you'll see all the membranes. What structure is found right here? The pituitary. Which pituitary? I made you look up, didn't I? Both the anterior and posterior. So we'll just say the pituitary gland. So now if anybody asks you, where's your pituitary gland, what are you going to say? How are you going to tell them? You say, put one finger at the bridge of your nose, your other finger at the tip of your ear. Superior part. Do it. Sure, she's doing it. Get the superior part of your ear. Where those 2 points meet in the middle of your head would be your pituitary. But it sits in the Turkish saddle, the sella turcica. Very important landmark in your skull. We don't have time to go into that now, but it gets you that it's in the sphenoid bone. Now, let's look at the ethmoid. We're only giving briefly things about these. So, the ethmoid we had it in orange over there, the part that we see from the base of the skull. There's lots more to it. So right here, what the ethmoid is developing into, what does ethmoid mean? It means sieve. You know what a sieve is? Fluid goes right through it, right? So this ethmoid here is called the Cribriform Plate. Cribriform Plate of the ethmoid that you see there. There's lots more to the ethmoid beneath that. But this is the Cribriform Plate. Have you ever played the game cribbage? You have a board with little pegs. This is filled with little holes. It's a sieve. Why does it have all those little holes? It has all those little holes so you can bring your smell impulses up into your brain. So these little holes convey your olfactory nerves. The olfactory nerves enter skull via the Cribriform Plate. So you can see why boxers may have problem with smell. Get hit in your head often enough and you just ruin all those little nerve fibers coming through from your nose to your brain, right? All right, he blinked to tell me it's time. Lots more to give, but we've got to give your slides. What do you think? Fascinating, isn't it? And you've lived with it all this time, and how much do you know about it? Take it for granted if it doesn't work. Such a shame. All right, first slide, please. Here we are. Let's review then what we've said. We talked about the granule cells of the cerebellum being the smallest cells in your body, and they do look like little granules, don't they? Those are all little cells. So here they're just piled together, millions of them. This is just another type of nerve cell, but these are the smallest, 4 mu. Next one. Now this is an anterior horn cell. For me to be moving this pointer now, the anterior horn cells in my, well, this is C8, T1, my vertebral column would be firing in my spinal cord. See how big they are, anterior horn cells. 135 mu. Next one. This is just, I showed this one previously, so you'd see simple epithelium here, squamous. This is on a valve in a vein. Just showed it more clearly than if I take a capillary. In the next one, this is a cuboidal. Not quite picture perfect, but as close as we come to it, lined by the simple squamous epithelium. In the next one, and then these are nerve cells to show that you have the greatest variety of shapes and sizes. This is the one that we mentioned where we'd have a process in our toe that goes all the way up. See, it looks like a single process, but it conveys information in and out, therefore pseudo-unipolar, and then takes it on up to the brain. In the next one, and here we are with our axial skeleton, with our skull, and within the skull we have our ossicles from the auditory system. We'll have the hyoid bone beneath the mandible here. We have the vertebral column in back. We have the sternum, the clavicle. We see the scapula and the clavicle make up the pectoral girdle, our upper appendage. Here's our pelvis, the pectoral girdle, the ilium, the ischium. This is what you're sitting on, your ischial tuberosities, and your pubis connecting the lower extremity to the axial skeleton. In the next one, this shows your fontanelles. Here we're forming with your frontal bones, parietal bones, and the anterior fontanelle. Did you ever know it was that big? But you can see you have connective tissue. Your cerebral cortex is growing at that slope of a curve till about 10 years of age after birth. So this won't fit tight till later. In the next one. And now we show the frontal bone from front, but we see it forms the superior wall of the orbit. We have the nasal bone. We didn't get to all the facial bones yet, but we can just say that the sphenoid will form the lateral wall of the orbit. The ethmoid will form the medial wall, because if I go straight through here, I'll be at my cribriform plate of the ethmoid. This is part of ethmoid. This is part of ethmoid. And the zygomatic arch is here, but the zygomatic process from the temporal bone is here. Your cheekbone's made up of 3 bones. Zygomatic process of temporal, zygomatic bone, zygomatic process of your maxilla. Next one. We didn't quite get this far, but this will show, this is the squamous portion. See how big and flat it is. 27 is very thin. Here's the zygomatic process of the temporal. Here's the mastoid process of the temporal. The Petrus portion is inside. This is your external auditory meatus. It's a tube. This is a depression. This is which joint? What bone is this? Come on. Mandible. What bone's it articulating with? Temporal. So what do we call the joint? Temporal mandibular. Say it. Learn to speak the language. Because we'll wait for you if you don't. Because that's the most important thing you're going to be taking with you. You've got to learn to communicate. You may know, oh, I know it, but I don't know how to say it. So we say it here. All right, it says exactly 12 o'clock. We made it. All right, enjoy. Have a nice holiday.